Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On Fáilte Road in Gachtia, le Hala Dún Carbon. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to the Louisburgh Townhall. Sorry for the slight delay, we were waiting on another demonstration to arrive. It's one on American time though, so we're doing that. Half that road, he said. A little bit of housekeeping. The toilets are in the hall as you just came in. Main exit is the door you came in, or here on your right as well. I would ask you to please take out your mobile phones, turn them off, or put them on air flight mode. That's good. We don't want any interference when we have a few short minutes to launch this amazing book of Cadden. I suppose the running order for the night, we'll have some words from Ciaran Staunton, who's home especially to help us to launch this book. We have connections with the area, family that were repopulating the area back there as well, so he'd have plenty of, and he knows everybody here in Facebook. And we have some lovely music accompanying it as well tonight from Charlie Keating. And we'll hear from the main man himself, Mr. Cadden, as well. I think we might take a small piece of music just to get us started, Charlie, if that's okay with you.
That's okay, Mary, thanks very much. I'm going to sing a song called The Lovely Green Banks of the Moy. It's a song written by Seamus O'Duffy one time, just to get us in the mood of what we're going to go through. One day, as I went on my rambles from Swinford to Sweet Valley, I met with a maid on our rambles, and her name it was Mary McGee. She sighed for the love of her country, Michael Davis, her true Irish boy, who is now in a prison in Portland, far from the lovely green banks of the Moy. I quickly approached this fair maiden, asking what was the cause of her woe, and what was the cause of her sorrow, which forced her to leave her own home. She said, for the love of my country, Michael Davis, my true Irish boy, who is now in a prison in Portland, far from the lovely green banks of the Moy. Now remember that sweet 67. There were brave men and true men, you know. There was brave Peter Carney who fought then, and he died in Killarney also. He was drilled by my darling McDavitt in the valleys and plains of the Moy. But now he's a prisoner in Portland, far from the lovely green banks of the Moy. Oh, now to conclude and to finish, I hope that day it will soon come, when cruel landlords and their bailiffs from the Isle of St. Patrick do run. We'll unfurl our green and gold banner
and we'll raise them to Ireland high. And we'll drink a toast to McDavitt on the lovely green banks of the morning.
Thank you very much. Lovely way to start the evening. As I said, we're all here to celebrate this historic book, which has been probably 60 years in the making. It's fantastic to actually have it in print and have it in our hands. A few little thank yous. I suppose I want to say thank you to the volunteers of Louisburgh-Killeen Heritage, of whom I'm a member, for their support with this launch, and they're providing all the refreshments for us as well tonight. And thank you to Michael Quinn from the Louisburgh Music School and Thomas Chambers for their help getting set up with microphones and sound and all of that kind of crap. I want to say thank you to the Louisburgh Community Futures for the use of the Town Hall tonight as well. And we have to say thank you to Billy Hughes for the use of the podium as well. We met Seamus and Eve, for some of you there tonight, so thank you to Duffy's Bookshop as well for helping us to get the books out there. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Ciaran Staunton.
Well, I have it. Moira and she. We got this podium from the Hughes got from Westport House. Obviously, there must be talking from Westport House. I'm trying to get the teachers to stand up and so I can see it all. But that was out of my brain next, and so I'm trying to perform the launch of this historic publication. 20 years, 70 years in the Wild West. First of all, from the family, let me just do some family work here. My wife Rory couldn't be here this evening. We were actually supposed to be in Washington this coming week doing some work on sepsis, what we do a lot of. However, when I got a call from Sean to be here in Louisburgh, Congress candidate, who was persuaded to this occasion. And all is way. Our daughter Cadden can't be here because she started college in London this week. Our son Rory will always be here. He loved Louisburgh, he loved Thallabaun every summer. And nothing better than Thallabaun, but on the way home, a Reiki 99s and Ciaran Staunton. So that's our tribute. A number of my brothers are there, Aidan and Finch are there. No strangers to Scorda, to Tavnia, to the hills. Either of them could come out of Scorda blindfolded. They wouldn't need any map readers or anything like that. So there isn't too much romance when someone said one time to Finch, why did you leave here? It's a lovely spot. He said, not near as romantic in October when you come down the side of the hill and the hailstones hitting it from 3 sides. My sister Loretta's here. Loretta personifies what I think I've always used in life. If you want something said, ask a man. But if you want something done, ask a woman. That's right, you know that. Our song of the evening about Michael Davitt, I think we all owe him a great debt, to say the least. We have a descendant of Michael Davitt here, so all the Davitts can line up. We're going to get the DNA tonight, all the Davitts. Joe McHale is a former Sinn Féin councillor from Castlebar, from Straight actually, and his wife Catherine has graced us. Joe is a legit descendant. So if the Davitts want to line up and get the DNA, we'll do them here later for a fiver. Thank you very much. I was indeed humbled when Sean Cadden contacted me and invited me to perform the official launch of this publication. Because up to now, this, and Sean, has been unwritten, but it's known that the history of the area where 1,200 people were evicted in howling conditions onto the side of the road in the middle of November, in the middle of fall, in the middle of the winter, and their houses were knocked with what we call mobile knocking units, 3 poles up and 4 poles across, where the men on the payroll of the landlord, backed up by the RIC and some others, knocked them. They knocked the roofs, they knocked the walls to make sure there could be no temporary living, and they moved them out of the villages. That was to be replaced by 6,000 horny sheep and 300 cattle that went forth from Scotland. The priority of the day was livestock over man and woman. My great-grandfather, Patrick Staunton, was 13 years old in 6 Thallabaun when he and his family were evicted into those harrowing conditions. Their houses were leveled. A great description of this, and the only one I have read up to that, is by the great historian from Kinnadugia, Una O'Malley, or we might have known her as Winnie Chimsey. Wrote in O'Connell, I believe in 1965, called The Wasting of Thallabaun. And she did give some description. I had been, I suppose, going back on the area, when I said that it hadn't been all written, it had been a song and recitation, it had been story told. And we'll say Charles Keating's Rory on the Hill was changed around many years later to put the wordings of those areas and those lands, which Keating didn't know about at those times, but when you read through the local version, you know that my mother was known about Closhcam and all those areas, you knew what was being held on. I was fortunate enough to meet Una O'Malley on many occasions. My dad and her were bit historians. Her brother Tom was there. We were often in that house in Kinnadugia with her nephew John Joe MacDonald. And they would talk, when we came in from Scotland, there'd be a pot of tea there, and they would talk about the stories that their parents had handed down to them. Remember, my dad was only, this whole episode had only happened 50 years before my father was born. So it was like something happened in 1975 being told now. It's not an awful long time ago when it's handed down. So we had all of that. I was pleasantly pleased when I picked up this publication, and there was photographs of both my sets of grandparents. My grandfather Andrew Staunton and his wife Alice O'Malley, who was originally from Clare Island, on one page, and on another page James Heenan from originally from Ireland and married my grandmother Cathy Rory in Bundara, where the family the Heenans are today. And when I got this from Sean, and I hate repeating what's like a cliche, it's unput down. Because you read that everyone writes a book, I picked it up, it's unput down. Well, this is unput down. I picked up this one evening and I started at it, and I finished it at 4:30 that morning. That's a fact. Sean Cadden has worked back in this area since 1973. And first of all, dealing with agricultural advisor, then broader into the overall sheep breeds in the area. And he knows every townland. I don't care where you mention it, whether it's down the Ten or any other Dara, or Glencrellan, or if you go back into Duvilla, or you go back into Ogur, or you go up into anyone, and if you try and throw in the spanner, you'll get you on it too. I was born in Dardreen decades ago. But I remember going down along where we'd see there was some bits of houses still left, back between the back of Dardreen near Burks in an area, there was still the back of some houses. The ridges were still there, and as you went back over Ben, back behind the river, back across where we used to come sometimes on the boat across from Ross Row, you had all those ridges, the family ridges. They were still there. That's where our people survived from. And Sean looks at 150 families disappeared from that area in the famine years. Not the ones who were evicted. 150 families either died of starvation, or some of them made it overseas. Some of them made it, the ones that could made it overseas, buried their loved ones. Some of their loved ones, others buried at sea, others maybe died, and others kept going to Chicago, to San Francisco in some cases. They went across country, they went uplands into, there's a history by a Heritage man who buried 3 of his 6 children here, and kept going, buried another one on the way. He started work in New York and kept going until he had his own farm in western Wisconsin. That is called determination. And those families who stayed were just as continuous to do what they could. The 150 families were evicted. And they didn't lie down. Resilience, survival. This publication is a story of resilience. It's survival, it's determination. Our ancestors lived despite all these odds. They survived oppression. They survived many generations of evictions. This wasn't the first one. Many of them had come here from other evictions. And many of them kept the evictions the same as put dog cattle out on the road. No one gave a word, as Sean said. No one even wrote about it. They survived evictions again. And yet, despite all of this, come on, 50 years after all of this, they mobilised in this area when the call went out to proclaim a republic. They mobilised. They mobilised in the 4th Battalion of the West Mayo Brigade of the Irish Republican Army with units in Louisburgh-Killeen Heritage, Poignant, and Thallabaun. We have the record here from everyone that lined up. They're in the military archives. They lined up despite fear of black and tans, RIC, the auxiliaries, torture, execution. And if you see this, there is one gentleman who was picked up and he was tortured. There's a statue in Newport across there where he was found with all the stone ends and fingernails pulled out to trying to get him to confess. He went mad. That's what they faced. Many of them lived in the rough, got very little to eat. My uncles and many other people, and that's a chapter for another day. And in 1923, many of the people were given houses and lands where they had been cleared from 70 years earlier. This happened to be through the work of the Irish Land Commission. The enormous farms to the west were striped. Men were given jobs for very little money, building all those strike walls from Kinnadoo all the way both sides of the road. They built walls. They walked in Feeney, they walked in Creekon, they walked everywhere to there to do that work. And you can see it today. Many of these who took part in the War of Independence immigrated. Others stayed on, started in the government agencies. One of the great attractions was many men, including my uncle, joined the Garda Síochána. They started a trend from Louisburgh in 1923, and every few years you'd hear you'd been out in Thallabaun that Ciaran had passed out of Temple Moor. And there's always Louisburgh people to this day joining in Garda Síochána and rising through the ranks. And at all the times, all of these people, wherever they were, they made one thing, was make life better for their children. Like they had been passed on to them, they were determined to make it better for those. Sean Cadden asked me to launch this publication. It's more than a book. It is a profound historical document. I think it should be in every Irish school curriculum. We all, in secondary school, had to learn about peg stairs. Many people who don't care for peg stairs ever again after having gone through it. I saw what you came through on the baskets and what they've done. We also learned about Until Enough by Mosa Crehan. Well, why not 70 years of the Wild West by Sean Cadden in every school going forward? It's our history. Go ahead, clap for it. The people you read about in this publication were our ancestors. They were giants. They toiled, they did everything possible to make better for us, their descendants. They were indeed giants without a question. And we stand on their shoulders. The written history, this written history, has been made possible through the work, the very hard work of Sean Cadden, the determination of Sean Cadden. And with that, I declare, formally launched, this book is now part of our history and writing. It will never be covered up again. Sean Cadden.
It's not easy to follow Ciaran. I probably should have gone first. The first time I came to Louisburgh was in October 1964 as an agricultural advisor. It was only 40 years after Doolah and Killarry farms had been divided, and most of the people who had moved back were still alive, and they were quite happy to talk about their experiences. But like most young fellas, I wasn't too interested in that, but I hadn't known about those farms until I came. So that might have pricked my interest. And about 10 years ago, I started this research, and I got sidetracked a couple of times along the way. I want to thank all the people who gave me information and photographs for the book. If I started naming them, I'd leave out somebody, and somebody would be upset. I'd also like to thank the people who have come here tonight, and some people have come a long way. Now, the book is about the period from post-famine evictions of 1851 to the successful redivision of Doolah and Killarry farms in 1923. The evictions in 1851 affected the three parishes of Louisburgh, Westport and Ahagowra. But as we're in Louisburgh, talk about the impact of the evictions on Louisburgh parish. After the famine, the Marquis of Sligo was in financial difficulty, and he wanted financially sound tenants. And Captain William Houston came along, and he was looking for a farm to keep 10,000 sheep. He eventually leased 40,000 acres from the Marquis. It was a third of the estate, but granted not the best third, and another 5,000 then from the elder Lucan. In the book, I only really look at the townlands that were cleared, but every townland in the parish was affected by the famine, and again in the 1851 evictions, the people who were evicted were trying to find a place to stay, and I'd say most townlands accepted some of them. The creation of the Doolah farm had a catastrophic effect on the western half parish of Louisburgh, the Killeen half parish. There were 302 families on the Houston and Loudon lands before the famine. 150 of them were lost during the famine. And in 1851 or 61, only 20 of the original 300 remained. And many of those families had been there for centuries. Some of them were very comfortable, and some of them were in poverty, particularly the cottagers. Sligo had stopped the division of holdings on his place in 1844. So a farmer who had a holding of land went from Sligo. He couldn't divide it with his brother or his brother-in-law. He had to find a holding that was vacant, and there was a bunch of holdings vacant after the famine, but he needed a bit of money as well to up and find a new place. The Moors of Hall owned the townland of Almore. That's as looked down on Killeen Church. And there was 31 families there in 1841. In 1851, during the famine, that had come down to 21. But in 1861, there was 54 families in Almore. People of Almore were much worse off after in 1860 than they had been 20 years earlier. They had to divide their little holdings with their brothers or relatives so that they could survive. Before the famine, the hills were grazed mainly with cattle in the summer. They were herded in boolies, and small numbers of sheep were kept as well. They weren't hill sheep, they were kept mainly to supply wool for the house. Vegetation on the hills was very heavy, and when a fire occurred, it had done a lot of damage. William Houston introduced the Scotch black-faced sheep and a new way of farming the hills. Sheep now graze the hills all year round. The change in stock changed the vegetation on the hills. Now there was only one pasture, the hill pasture, and there was no hay or winter feed or anything like that fed. Sheep survived on the hill on the winter on the vegetation that grew the previous summer and remained uneaten. It probably took 5 or 6 years before he built up full ewe numbers. He originally bought sheep from Scotland, and afterwards he imported rams regularly from Scotland. But the sheep had no place to go except on the hill. If there were too many sheep and a bad winter came, big numbers of sheep died, and the stocking rate was brought back to a sustainable level. The hills at that time couldn't become overgrazed, because the hills themselves controlled the stock that could be carried. As far as sheep were concerned, it was the survival of the hardiest. Every 10 years or so, and I remember some of these years, a bad winter came and there were so many dead sheep, the foxes couldn't keep them all eaten. Usually when the sheep died on the mountain, all that remained a week later was the wool on the horns. But in bad winter, sheep could be there for a couple of weeks and they wouldn't be touched. The income from that system of hill farming came mainly from the sale of aged wethers and wool, with some money from ewes and old ewes and small land. In the 70 years that the farm was in existence, several characters came and went. Captain William Houston is the one people most talk about. He was the first, because he set up the farm and stocked it. But after 20 years, he died suddenly in July of a stroke in 1872. His wife Matilda was a novelist, and she wrote about her time in July and wrote several other books as well. The book on July was 20 years in the Wild West. Matilda said at that time they paid their labourers 6 pence a day, and she described the houses that her husband built for her staff as hovels. She was surprised they had such poor living conditions. This, she said, was because they were Catholics. If they were Protestants, they would have better living conditions on 6 pence a day. But it was a very unhappy time for her. She gave us much of the information we have on the farm in William's time. She also gave me the idea of the name for this book. She never farmed. She left as soon as William died. I don't believe she ever came back. When they were putting up the headstone to William, they have a big long inscription on it, but they didn't leave any room for a memorial to Matilda. They didn't expect her to be buried in the graveyard in Westport House Estate. The farm was subleased after William died from 1872 to 82. But in 1883, the farm came back to Sligo, and he leased it to William's son, George. Now, George had no interest at all in farming, and he ran the place into bankruptcy. And his cousin, Alfred Houston Boswell, took over, and he farmed there until 1930. There's often confusion about the names Houston and Boswell, but Alfred's father was George Houston, a brother of Captain William, and he married Euphemia Boswell, and he added Boswell to his name, and he became George Houston Boswell, and the son that came to the west was Alfred Houston Boswell. But the man best remembered, I think, was Hugh MacDonald, who originally came from Scotland as a herald to Dardreen in 1870. People talk well of Hugh. He was a very tall man with a long white beard in his later life. He spent about 15 years as a shepherd in Dardreen, and in the mid-1980s he became steward or manager for Houston Boswell. He then moved from Dardreen to Killery Lodge, and he stayed in Killery Lodge in St. Margaret's for about 25 years. Alfred didn't renew the lease in 1913 because Sligo was selling out to the Congested Districts Board, and he knew that he'd be pushed off. But after 1913, Hugh went back to Scotland, but his wife and his daughter are buried here in the Church of Ireland graveyard. Hugh's son James MacDonald married Honor Dardreen of Thallabaun, and the descendants of that family are still in the area. They're the only relatives of the people who came from Scotland. But we have another lady here tonight whose ancestors worked for James Houston in Dulac. She has come from Moycullen tonight. I'd like to see 70 years in the Wild West as a story of success. Started with the evictions in 1851, and in the 1870s a long period of land agitation started, and that eventually led to the repopulation in the area in 1923. Thank you.
You're ready for it? It'll be lovely. Thank you, Charlie. And thank you, Sean. Thank you, Ciaran, as well.
Here goes. I'm going to give a crack at Rory of the Hill, as Ciaran already mentioned it. And this is a song that was written at that time. So really what you should do is just close your eyes and go back. This is a time when there was no rural electrification, no running water. Oh my goodness, we've come a long, long way, and it's not that long ago. When you think back, maybe it's in your great-grandfather's time. No New Hollands or no new John Deere's. Here goes. The mountains of Killeen, I have rambled to and fro. The Clashclane Road I know right well, and the hill of Carramore. If Robinson and Hoxton be perceiving still, sure we'll meet them at their own hall door, says Rory of the Hill. When God created this dear isle, so fertile and so fair, was it a thing for senseless brutes to feed and fatten there? What woe would follow Hoxton or Lucan's iron men? I'll tumble them into Dulac Lake, says Rory of the Hill.
I know I shall be welcome to Bull and Dardreen, where nothing but the canny Scot and sheepdog can be seen. If this damned act is not torn up by Gladstone and his men, to hell with Billy and the boys, says Rory of the hill. I saw my dwelling tumble down. I swore I got right mad when Scully and his agents came to me. They acted bad. They turned my mother out the door. 'Twas sorrowful to see. I'll give them all what Hunter got, says Rory of the hill. But Grant and Big MacDonald don't care how times will go, while Houston now and Boswell pay the rent for them and co. We'll go up by Loch na Quair and come around behind the pen. We'll leave the stragglers at the top, says Rory of the hill. But soon they'll all be paupers with a brand upon their back. And little I care for the lot of them, we're in the bottom of Barsack. Some of them live in Cowlan and others in Strabane. We'll wipe the earth beneath their feet, says Rory of the hill. Oh, the mountains of Kilbeaver I have rambled to and fro. The Trashcave Road I know quite well, and the hill of Carramore. If Robinson and Houston be perceiving still, sure we'll meet them at their own hall door, says Rory of the hill. Oh, we'll meet them at their own hall door, says Rory of the hill.
We will have a few questions here of Sean. He has not seen the questions before.
Speak into the mic.
What you're talking about, you have to hear. So we're going to have a few questions here for Sean. Then we will open the floor to some other questions. So, and in the meantime, Seamus Duffy has books. They are someplace to granners and get Seamus?
No, that's it.
2 for 1, and he'll give you a look money if you buy 3. Sean, question of the head. You grew up in the plush meadowlands of Glen Island. What made you spend 10 years researching the publication on Louisburgh?
Well, as I said, when I started working here, I was intrigued. I hadn't known about the Houston or Loudon Farms, and I was intrigued by that story. And when you're working, you have lots of things on your mind, and you don't have the time to give to research a story like this. And it was at that stage when I retired that I decided I'd look into this and see how did these farms come about, and how did the people get back to the west, as they say here.
Number 2, you have some great research, some great photographs many people may have never seen before. Obviously people dug very deep into trunks and suitcases and everything else to get some of the great photographs. When you approached people with this project, was there a general positive Were people mixed? Were people said that secret dogs lie in the family and all that way back? Or was there 100% encouragement?
Everyone was enthusiastic about telling the story. I didn't feel any. I didn't talk to anyone who didn't want the story written. Everyone was very positive. But there isn't an awful lot of lore, and we had to spend quite a time in the National Library in the record of the Sligo estate. One thing about the Sligo estate, they kept records and they have them. The index to the estate is to the estate papers in the library in Westport, and the index is 600 pages. So there's a lot of information to be gone through there, and we spent, myself and Peggy spent days and days in the National Library. But there was no, there was great cooperation here, and I got any photographs that were available.
We said Boswell has somewhere in 6,000 sheep. Where did he bring them into, and how did he get them in?
Well, we don't know an awful lot about the imports in the 1850s, but Tommy Cadden in Tommy Power, Tommy was alive into the 1970s, and he said that Houston Boswell imported sheep into Bundoora in 1896. He had given up part of the Sligo part of the estate in 95, and he came to an agreement with Sligo, and he imported sheep again in 96. So I presume that William would have brought his sheep into Bundoora. If you brought them into Westport, they'd have the journey out to Dulach or Thallabaun or Lachta or wherever they were to go to. But if they brought them into Bundoora, they were on their own ground, and they could be rested there for a few days, and then they could be driven to wherever they wanted. So I believe they came into Bundoora. Sheep and good swimmers, but they could be thrown off the boat, and if the boat was near the shore, and they'd make their way to the shore.
While doing your research, did you find a draw to go into any of the more historic things in the area? For instance, the Clapper Bridge, the old graveyard of Killadooya, how the land got washed away. I think there's an old fort below Wesley Morrison's land, the shipwreck, could that be part of the Armada, standing stones, etc. Or did you stay focused on what you were started at?
I stayed focused on what I set out to do. It was easy to get distracted, but I managed not to get distracted. I got distracted a couple of times while I was there with other things. In 1916 or 1914 or 2014, we were doing a project down in Newport, and some of the people there said to me, what are we going to do about 1916? So we hadn't thought about what to do for 1916, but that put the idea in our head that we'd research the War of Independence and the Civil War in Newport. And we spent a few years at that, and we wrote the book Remember Us, which is a fairly comprehensive account of the War of Independence and the Civil War in the Newport area. Some people said to us like that the Civil War was too sensitive to touch, but we gave an account of the Civil War, and I think people accepted that we had treated the Civil War fairly, that we happened to come down on either side. When that finished, then Harry Hughes came to me and he said to me that they were going to do a book on the West Mayo Brigade, the Men of the West, and I spent a couple more years with Harry and late Vincent Kane and James Kelly on that book. And when I got that done in 22, I came back to 70 years in the Wild West.
Of course, there is speculation about the fort in Wesley Morrison's land as it seems to grow, whether or not it's actually a fort or where P.T. Morrison keeps his money. Going back to 1773, when you came here, you were a man from the department, as they would deem it. You came in here where people have been doing this system of farming for, we'd say, 50 years. You were trying to change people around from, we'd say, letting all the lambs to the hill, 25% today, the weather lambs died before they got to 3 years of age, letting the old lambs to the hill, you convinced them to do that. Did you go through an enormous pushback, because obviously it was successful, how hard was it to convince people that this was the right thing to do in 1973? After all, anyone who wasn't local was considered to be a man from the department, which is not bad. I remember.
Sheep were never fed when I started work. And because they've never been trained to eat meat, if they got weak, they wouldn't eat and they'd die of starvation. But I spent all my time in Louisburgh. I was sent across the bay to Ballycroy for a few years, and I got just back to there as well, and I met Peggy. But in 1969, I was upset that this huge loss of sheep and lambs, and that people weren't able to do anything about it. So in 1969, I got 2 people to feed meal to their lambs. We fed them a £1/4 pound a day for January and February. And John Michael McNulty in Newport, he said stuck on 180 euros. He couldn't get above 180 euros because they looked like they'd dry back. But after he started feeding me, in a couple of years, he was up to 250 euros. Now there was a lot of, we'd say, disbelief at this idea of feeding meat to sheep. And I was always told that these sheep farmers are very conservative, they won't change. But when the farmers discovered that this feeding the meat to lambs kept them alive and you could get into more sheep, that was a practice that was adopted very fast. See, up till 1950, there was 100 years of hill farming without any change. The ownership of the land changed, but the system of farming didn't. But after the famine, or after the 1950, when meat rationing was abolished in England, and the housewife now had the choice of buying a lamb or buying mutton, she bought lamb. And the demand for wether meat dropped. At the same time, synthetic fibres were coming in and replacing wool. And the value of the fleece was falling. So farmers were trying to get out of having a flock of wethers and trying to have a few more ewes and sell the wether lambs. But the wether lambs were too small and they weren't saleable. And we spent a good while encouraging people to manure the land and reclaim it, and that they would have a better and more saleable lamb. I think the right out subject now is to get it. Of this, farmers are getting blamed for overgrazing, and there's no doubt about the hills are a lot more heavily grazed than they were 50 years ago. But I think in the 1800s, farmers demanded the 3 Fs. Fixity of tenure, fair and free sale. In the 1970s and the 1960s and 70s, the farmers discovered another 3 Fs: fencing, feed and fertilizer. They now had 2 pastures, the improved pasture and the hill pasture, and they didn't have to look after the hill pasture the same way as it was before, and the hill pasture could become overgrazed and stock would be taken off and fed on the improved land. So that's what, how and why the place became overgrazed.
One last question before we hand this to the floor. You retired 25 years ago, right? So what's the secret for having such energy and still looking like a young fella? Is Tower Hill the new Ciaran Go ahead.
I told you that Ciaran was good at plum off. No, I'm 84. I'm very lucky. I'm in good health, and I haven't any ailments that's disabling me or anything like that. So hopefully we'll get a few more years out of it.
Sean, that's unbelievable, 84. We are just going to go to, I was absolutely thrilled and delighted about, Sean asked would he include a poem that I wrote when I was about 14 years old, a long time ago, and it also was published in the Killeen Church and People book that came out in 1997 to commemorate the 100-year centenary of the church in Killeen. But I will ask Ciaran for a moment to help me. Behind every good man that has no ailments, thanks be to God, there's a long-suffering wife. And we want to acknowledge Peggy for her fantastic commitment. Getting shy now. But you're a fantastic historian in your own right, Peggy, and we've learned a lot on the journey, so I want to thank you from everybody as well for being on this journey with us. Congratulations. It's nice to see you. So, a little poem that we have the music from Charlie, and if there's any questions, gladly pass the mic around. I'm sure some people might have questions from the floor as well, because Sean, you're not in any rush home yet. No. So, the poem is called They Lived Long Ago. A clump of stones crumpled down. Who lived there years ago? The grass too high, turning brown, covering the plot where the praties used to grow. A nice family used to live on that farm. They worked hard trying to live off the land. They say the old man could spin a good yarn. They had to leave early under British command. But what did they live with? What kind of a home? How do they manage without electric? An innocent child asked in a serious tone. I'm a Craigero, you just don't understand. They had Mother Nature and God. They loved, cursed and tilled the land. Such talk of changes was only a cod. Bringing water from the well in a bucket, using bare hands to do every job, getting the hay cocked in a rocky field that was rugged, or hurrying to be finished before the fog. Slicing the slain through mushy black peat, thirsting for the much-deserved bottle of tea, ducking the flying clod which someone would beat, but proud of the work at the close of the day. Oh, they had candles and lanterns and open fires, big black iron pots, a crane and a tongs. The smell of freshly baked bread was a heart's desire. Just one taste of the steamy hot dough was much longed. A horse and a cart were the finest of transport, to mass, to town, to a fair or the crossroads. Down that briar-filled lane they might court, or go picking blackberries, of which they'd get loads. But don't ask foolish questions of entertainment. The one storyteller did make a weekly tour. If you missed the crossroads Cayley, you'd lament the lost chances of lonesome singles pure. They lived in the shadow of that great mountain, and they were blessed with the produce of that mighty ocean. So tonight in your bed, pray for your kin, as they would have done with holy devotion. Thank you.
We have a mobile mic, so we'll take a couple of questions from the floor.
Thanks very much.
Can I speak up?
Absolutely brilliant evening, and thank you very much, Sean. And I'm looking forward to reading the book. I'm curious, I come from that, I came from Dardreen, and my mother came from out of Glenmora, so I know a fair bit of the history of it. But my question is, what did he do with all these sheep? Did he export them to the UK, to England? Did they have centres like, there was thousands of sheep on all that estate. So I was just curious, where did they sell them to or send them to, or how did they go?
There's no record of him selling sheep, but I presume the sheep were sold and exported to Scotland through Westport. And in the book I look at the price of the sheep in Scotland, and there was there was a high price and a low price. So I always took the low price. I said that would be the cost of it, transporting them to Scotland and the weight that they'd lose on the way. But Paddy Riley of Loughborough told me that it was after the railway came to Westport, which was in the mid-60s, that they used to send sheep to Ballinasloe, to the Great Fair in Ballinasloe. And I doubt if they brought 4,000 or 5,000 sheep to Ballinasloe. But there is records of big sales of sheep in Westport, like when one of the sub-tenants was selling out, he had about 10,000 sheep, and they were sold in Westport.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Ciaran.
Okay, who's the next question? Back here. Martin Gavin back in the corner. Left-hand corner.
Was there any difference in where Sligo's tenants were evicted to as compared to Lucan's? Were they sent in different directions, or how did they manage to settle, or did they just move and find somewhere themselves, or was there something provided?
In Sligo rent books of 1851 and 52, there's a comment in the side let to Captain Houston, or will be let next year to Captain Houston. But those people were under notice to be gone by a particular date. And if you got an eviction notice, you took it seriously. And if you weren't gone by May Day or November Day or whatever day it was, you were put out on the road. My great grandfather, Robert Cadden, he was married with a few children in Crossmolina in 1851. Now he was renting land from a tenant, not from a landlord, and then the tenant wanted the land for himself. So he was evicted in 1851, and he managed to find a place in Glen Island, which was about 25 miles away. And how he found that place, I don't know. It was in nearly a day's journey on a horse to come up, and another day's journey to go home. But Sligo gave the tenants here time to go. They weren't all gone. They don't appear in any of the records. But there is a court case in 1861 of a Winnie Gavin in Gowler, which is in Erf, near Erf School. And she was brought to court for trespass in 1861. So she hadn't left. And Sligo appears to have given people at least a chance to find the place. But the law is that Lucan came back sometime around 1850 to collect his rent. And the story is told that some people questioned that was he the man that was entitled to the rent. And he got into a rage and said, he closed his book and he said, I'll tell you, we'll soon know who's entitled to the rent. And they were all evicted. That's the story they tell about Houston, or about Lucan. Lucan showed no mercy at all, but Sligo gave people an opportunity to find a place.
Okay. Sean, thanks very much for a most interesting talk, and Ciaran for a great launch. Just a quick one. Do you know anything about the history of the bridge in Erf? That's called Houston's Bridge. No one got that?
No.
It's just between Erf and it connects up to Tawny Yard, up there. But I think people call it Houston's Bridge. So just.
The one going into the Chagas farm.
The one going into the Chagas farm. Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Going into 2010.
Yes.
Now, Houston built that bridge, and there was a couple of references to it in the records. One is when I think the poor commissioners were complaining that they wanted the doctor to go from, that was going from Rena to Clondalkin. They wanted him to be able to go across and into Clondalkin rather than having to go down by sea or down the Kilburn. And he wouldn't agree to that. There's another reference as well to where two people, the Erf Bridge got washed away about 1859, and it was gone for a couple of years. But two fellas were coming from a fair in Leon or business out that anyway, and they were coming back, and there was flood in the river, and they knew they couldn't cross the Erf River. So there was a Dominic McGrail who had the key to the gate, and coaxed Dominic anyway to let them through. But a couple of weeks later, they got a surprise. They were prosecuted for trespass. But they were lucky. The case was dismissed. That just for that kind of thing, you could be prosecuted. And you might say the fine and things like that were small. You could be fined sixpence, with sixpence expenses. The trouble was, each of those was a day's wages. So that prosecution was a very serious thing, even and the prosecutor was generally successful.
Thank you. And just one quick one, if I may. The number of deserted villages that you've come across in your research, like Maguire's in Louisburgh-Killeen, for example, I'm thinking of it. Are there many more like that?
Surprisingly not. But I think what happened was that these houses were stone. But when the Congested Districts Board came back to repopulate these places, they took the stone from the old houses and built new houses. So for that reason, a lot of the remains of the old houses are gone. But in Oakwood, where they didn't build anything, or in Derry, which is a very remote townland along the Kilray, stone houses are still there. But there's no doubt the houses were there. But I think the stones were scavenged to building or making roads or whatever they needed to do.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for a great talk. So we could give us a rough outline of the amount of land where the borders were around it. You know?
Now the farming started on the peak of the Parkview Mountains. And as you drive out from Westport to Leanan, and the mountains on your left, Clara ran up to the top of those mountains, and it ran from there to the mountain Kilray. The boundaries were very well chosen, and they didn't give a huge amount of problems with trespass. But there was trespass in Derrycroft on the our side, and in Drummond they were always in trouble there. The sheep came across from one side of the mountain into Glenlord, and I think there was people nearly in Westport Courthouse every week with trouble there. But most places that people complained about was at Thallabaun. Where it may have been skin a Dewey. There wouldn't have been any really stock-proof fences there. And Loudon, that's from about 1855 until about 1890. And he had those people harassed with the for trespass. But most boundary areas were well chosen, that they wouldn't cause them problems.
You come to Louisburgh. You come to Louisburgh.
No. In this side, you only have Lochtan, and it's upper Lochtan, and it stayed on that side then, and when you got down to Glen Keane, you know, the Glen Keane farm there, and it's Shrarushke, which is the next townland, which is the Leanan side of Thallabaun. And it ran across the mountain then out across the mountain out to the sea. There was no, the boundary at Thallabaun caused no problem with trespass. And I think it's a credit to the, we say to the Heritage, that they didn't harass the neighbours, bringing them to court. There was no court cases for Thallabaun, which was surprising because Thallabaun was a very overcrowded area at that time.
Thank you.
No, Sean, well done in our book. Patrick, haven't looked through it, but is there any pictures of the sheep that came in them times, and also what used to dose them with?
Well, no, there's no pictures or records really of those sheep that came in. We presume the black faces, which are going back to that particular time, you had bracket faces and black faces. And you could have a flock, but half of them bracket faces and half of them black faces. And it was important to see that up till about 1970, wool was valuable. And white wool was much more valuable than black wool. And after 1970, when the price of wool went down, it didn't matter whether the wool was black or white, you got the same price for it. Yeah. And that's part of the reason why what I call it a fashion for black has developed among sheep. People will tell you that these black sheep, these very black ones, are more hardy. I don't see that at all. And in any case, you see that the sheep, the way sheep are fed now, they don't need to be as hardy as they needed to be up until about 1960, when they were getting no feed. That's when you needed the hardy sheep. And at that time, they still had the bracket face and the black face.
Before I take another question, I think Barry Gaffney is there, Pat Joyce, and some people who are trying to retain the bracket face. I think they should be classed as a rare breed. I think bracket sheep have got bad beyond in the last 20 years. I brought bracket Joes down at the top of Mealway and they were just as hardy as anything else. Going back to a question there by Martin Gavin on where did they get, they weren't rehoused. And certainly from the Lucan estate, as Una O'Malley wrote in a book that time, they got a notice and there was a mobile group that went out the next day, backed up by the RIC, and they put everyone to the road. And in some cases, if other tenants were told, if you take them in, you'll be evicted too. So that's what they ended up in Dalmore, Greenwood and all that. But there was no rehousing project for anyone that came out of, that Willie Jimity wrote of, anyone coming out of Scotland or any of those areas. The other thing I want to ask you, Sean, is going back to West, where did that farm begin? Was it Kennedulia by Davits and Michael Wales, that area? Is that the stream run down there that started the big estate, or where actually did the estate start when you're going back Kennedulia?
Now, most of you won't know what we're talking about.
They will.
The Hester's is in Thallabaun, and they were the first, that was the first farm in Thallabaun. Now, Loudon didn't rent off, there was three families there, two Hesters and the Jorkins. And they had a bad time, but they were in Thallabaun. Now, later down, you see one of the Honor Jorkin married James McDonald, Hugh McDonald's son. And I think at that stage, there wasn't the same problems with the boundary as there had been earlier.
That would be Jim McDonald's farm.
Yeah.
You know that?
John, what happened the tenants that got evicted in the 6,000 Scotch sheep?
What happened there? What happened there? Stock or cattle and the little flocks fell down the road.
There's no record of that. I think in general they wouldn't have had a lot of stock. But the sheep weren't through hill sheep. They were kept for wool rather than for meat. And there's a record in the Congested Districts Board baseline reports where in Carna all the clothes were homemade. Now, if you make your shirt out of wool, it won't be very comfortable. But obviously the wool that these sheep had was very fine and it could be woven next to the skin. And we have discovered in Connemara traces of these old sheep. They call them pladors because they lived on the shore. And I believe that they were the sheep that were here before the Scotch blackfaces. Now the sheep, the cattle seem to have been handled differently. When they brought in the Kylos and the Galloways, they appear to have crossed them with the local cattle. That doesn't appear to have happened with the sheep. That they just got rid of the sheep, but they crossed with the cattle, and the cattle were bred up as Kylos and later down as Galloways.
There's nothing about sheep, but congratulate you, Sean, on the fabulous book. I can't wait to get stuck into it. I was just wondering, for Mr. Staunton, did you know that Honor Durkin's mother, Anne, was a Staunton from Feenan?
I knew we were, thank you for giving me that information. I knew, my brother Ed is way older than I am, he might remember, but he's in front of you. I knew we were related to Jim MacDonald. And I don't know if Jim here tonight or not, but I know that we're related to Jim MacDonald and to all of that family. I wasn't sure which the side it came from, but I knew that we were closely related. The Stauntons were persecuted, and we still are. With that, I think we're going to hand it back to Bannon Chee, and a neighbour of ours. I mean, what can I say? We're all from the West. Well, most of us are from the West. The man from the department was a go-in. But please give Moira, Paul, and Emilia Williams.
Thank you so much for your attentiveness, and thank you to Ciaran for officially launching. Thank you to Charlie for the lovely singing. Might have a little bit while there's tea going on. But sincere congratulations to Sean and to all your family and to Peggy and to everyone, because this is absolutely a historic night and a historic book, and we're so delighted that this is the first launch. There's going to be more launches later in the month. There's one in Westport, and then in October I think there's one in Castlebar. We shall see that on the papers and the media coming soon. Don't forget a cup of tea there for yourselves, and Sean will be down mingling among you in a few moments as well. Books are still available there. Yeah, there's still a few books left there. Thank you so much.
Before you go, can I say something? Can I just have it off? A number of people have said that this is a great book to send to our relations in America. While indeed it is, but I think it's a better book to send to our relations in Ireland. Because when we went to school, we never learned what Sean Cadden has written. I had an educator from this part of the country insist that the famine ridges were not indeed famine ridges. He was an educator, mind you. So some of us went through this era of revisionism. So for those of us who have family here in Ireland, and maybe some in Australia recently, I suggest this is a great book for our family in Ireland, for our family here. Because us in America, we didn't have revisionism. We got it passed on to us. So there was no glossing over what happened in the Gorta more, or if you, from my point of view, genocide, but that's for another day. So I suggest all the relations in Ireland, nephews, nieces, sons, grandsons, let's not be afraid of our history, because I'll tell you what, they're the people that made us what we are today. Gotta be in mind.